The morning sun filtered through the old shelter windows, casting long beams across the worn concrete floors. Dust floated lazily in the air, glittering under the pale light. It should have been an ordinary day. Morning cleanups, feeding routines, the hopeful barking of new arrivals. But today, an unspoken sadness weighed on everyone. In the farthest corner of the shelter, past rows of kennels where curious faces peered out hopefully, lay two figures almost too still to notice. Daisy and Rusty, nestled against each other in a tangle of fur, seemed untouched by the stir of the shelter around them. Their breathing rose and fell in a gentle rhythm, two hearts leaning on one another in silent understanding. Volunteers tiptoed past their kennel, offering soft smiles and whispered encouragements, but nobody dared linger long. It was too hard to look at them for more than a few moments. In a place already filled with stories of abandonment and second chances, Daisy and Rusty's bond was something rare, something pure. It was as if the world outside had faded away, leaving only the two of them, finding comfort in the only thing that had remained constant, each other. Daisy, once vibrant and playful, had arrived at the shelter weeks ago after being found wandering a busy intersection. Rusty had been dropped off days later, shivering from more than just the cold. Alone, they were shy, withdrawn, and hesitant to trust. But somehow, when they met, the walls around them crumbled. Daisy would nuzzle Rusty's side, and Rusty, timid by nature, would wag his tail, just barely, for the first time. Over the weeks, staff watched a quiet transformation unfold. They would often find the pair cuddled together, sharing a blanket or lying in the same patch of sunlight during morning hours. They didn't demand attention. They didn't bark for treats. They simply existed for each other, weathering the unknown with nothing but faith in their bond. This morning, however, that bond seemed especially poignant. Daisy's head rested gently on Rusty's shoulder, her eyes half closed, but alert to every sound. Rusty curled around her protectively, opened his eyes whenever footsteps approached, as if silently asking for more time. The usual bustle of the shelter was subdued. Staff exchanged quick glances, their hearts heavy. They had done everything they could. Adoption ads, meet and greets, social media posts. Nothing had saved Daisy and Rusty from today's cruel deadline. Still, they clung to each other, unaware of what the next few hours were supposed to bring. Or perhaps, in the way animals often do, they understood far more than anyone realized. In their quiet cuddle, there was no fear. Only love, trust, and a silent plea that somehow, someway, this would not be the end. The decision had been hanging over the shelter for days, growing heavier with each passing hour. No one spoke about it openly, but it sat in every corner, every whispered conversation, every downward glance. Shelters were supposed to be places of hope, places where second chances bloomed. But sometimes reality arrived before hope could catch up. The shelter was over capacity. Dogs filled every kennel, every spare crate, and the waiting list outside stretched longer than anyone wanted to admit. New rescues arrived daily. Strays pulled from dangerous streets, abandoned pets, litters of puppies born into the unknown. With winter approaching, the pressure had only grown worse. Resources were stretched thin, and every day became a delicate balance between saving lives and making impossible choices. When the meeting was called the evening before, the staff already knew what it would be about. Huddled together in the break room, they listened as the shelter manager gently, almost apologetically, explained the numbers. Not enough space, not enough adopters, not enough time. Lists had been made, reviewed, and revised again. And despite everyone's best efforts, Daisy and Rusty's names remained. "They're good dogs," one volunteer had whispered, voice trembling. "They are," the manager agreed, eyes full of sadness. "They just didn't get seen in time." No one argued. They couldn't. It wasn't fair, but it was the truth. Daisy and Rusty were quiet, gentle souls who didn't push to the front of their kennels when visitors came. They didn't bark or beg for attention. They simply waited day after day for someone to notice them. And in a world that often moved too fast, they had been overlooked. Now the shelter had no choice but to make room for the wave of new arrivals coming in. If they didn't, even more dogs would have no chance at all. It was a decision made with broken hearts and tear-filled eyes. No one blamed the system more than those working inside it. As the morning wore on, preparations moved forward with aching slowness. Volunteers took extra care to bring Daisy and Rusty their favorite breakfast, soft chicken and rice. Someone found an old, worn blanket from the donation bin and tucked it into their kennel, a small gesture of comfort in an unbearable situation. Still, Daisy and Rusty clung to each other, unaware of the meetings, the paperwork, the somber nods exchanged across the shelter floor. To them, it was just another morning, another day to lean against one another, another day to find warmth and love in a world that had too often been cold. What they didn't know was that fate had not yet finished writing their story. As the morning stretched into noon, the shelter seemed to move in slow motion. Conversations were hushed, and footsteps softened against the concrete floors, as if the very building itself understood the sorrow that clung to the air. Everyone found small reasons to pass by Daisy and Rusty's kennel. A quick refill of water, an extra treat slipped between the bars, a gentle hand pressed against the cold metal. Tiny, helpless gestures to offer comfort when words simply weren't enough. Inside their kennel, Daisy and Rusty barely stirred. They lay tangled together, a patchwork of gold and brown fur, breathing in quiet unison. Daisy's nose twitched against Rusty's shoulder, and he shifted slightly, curling even closer around her, as if determined to shield her from the unseen sadness beyond their little world. A volunteer named Mia knelt by their kennel, unable to stop herself. She had spent countless afternoons sitting by these two, reading quietly or just keeping them company when the shelter grew too noisy. Now she pressed her hand to the bars and whispered softly, voice cracking under the weight of it all. "You deserved so much better," she said, tears blurring her vision. Without lifting their heads, Daisy's tail gave a faint wag, and Rusty let out a soft, content sigh. It was enough to shatter Mia's heart completely. Knowing time was slipping away, one of the staff members, Jason, pulled out his phone and snapped a few pictures. In the soft glow of the kennel's lighting, the image was hauntingly beautiful. Daisy resting her head on Rusty's chest, eyes half closed in trust, while Rusty pressed his nose into her fur. It was a portrait of unconditional love, captured in a moment that should never have needed capturing. The photos quickly made their way around the shelter. Some staff had to step outside for fresh air. Others wiped away tears at their desks, pretending to be busy with paperwork. No one, not even the ones who had been in this field for years, could steel themselves against the heartbreak of Daisy and Rusty's goodbye. The minutes ticked by, each one bringing the inevitable closer. Yet inside that small kennel, the world remained unchanged. Daisy and Rusty weren't afraid. They weren't anxious or restless. They had each other, and that was enough. In their silent embrace, they told a story more powerful than words. A story of loyalty, trust, and quiet courage in the face of the unknown. And somehow, in a place heavy with sorrow, their love lit a tiny flame of hope that refused to go out. Unbeknownst to everyone, that flame was about to grow into something no one could have predicted. Just as the clock crept toward the hour no one wanted to face, Dr. Ramirez made her way down the hallway, a clipboard tucked under her arm. Her steps were slow, deliberate. Every animal in the shelter had been a patient, a soul she had cared for, and today's duties felt heavier than any before. She paused outside Daisy and Rusty's kennel, heart tightening at the sight of them, curled so tenderly together. They looked so peaceful, so trusting. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, she opened the gate and knelt beside them, murmuring soft greetings to avoid startling them. Rusty lifted his head slightly, his brown eyes blinking up at her with quiet curiosity. Daisy remained pressed against him, her body relaxed. Dr. Ramirez smiled sadly and reached out a hand, letting Rusty sniff her fingers before gently placing the stethoscope against his chest. What she heard made her frown. Rusty's heartbeat was steady but strangely slow for a dog his size. His breathing, too, was softer than expected, not labored, but different. It was something she had noticed before, but today it stood out more sharply, perhaps because she was listening closer, or perhaps because her heart refused to give up on them so easily. She moved to check Daisy next. Her heart and breathing were within normal limits, but something in her posture caught Dr. Ramirez's trained eye. Daisy wasn't just cuddling Rusty for comfort. She was anchoring him, grounding him. Their bond wasn't just emotional, it was physical, essential. Dr. Ramirez sat back on her heels, mind racing. There was a chance, however slim, that Rusty's behavior, his low energy, his shy withdrawal, wasn't simply a matter of personality. It could be medical, and if that were true, it meant they might have misjudged him completely. "Not today," she whispered under her breath, determination hardening inside her. She stood quickly and called over one of the vet techs. "I need a quick thyroid panel on Rusty," she said, her voice leaving no room for questions. "And I want a fresh behavioral review on Daisy while we wait." The tech hesitated for only a second before nodding and hurrying off. Around them, the shelter buzzed with low murmurs, people sensing a ripple of change, but not yet daring to hope. Dr. Ramirez knelt again, resting a hand gently on Daisy's back and whispering to both dogs, "Hold on a little longer. We're not done fighting for you." In the stillness of that moment, as Rusty nestled his nose into the crook of Daisy's neck, it was as if the universe itself paused, waiting to see what would happen next. In the small clinic room tucked behind the main kennels, Rusty sat patiently on the examination table, Daisy right beside him. A vet tech gently scratched behind his ears while Dr. Ramirez waited, arms crossed tightly against her chest, watching the screen as the blood test results loaded. Every second felt stretched thin, the minutes dragging in an agonizing crawl. Finally, with a soft chime, the results appeared. Dr. Ramirez leaned forward, scanning the numbers carefully. Her heart skipped a beat. There it was, clear as day. Rusty's thyroid hormone levels were dangerously low. He wasn't just shy or slow-moving because of fear. He was sick, suffering from a completely treatable condition, hypothyroidism. A daily pill, inexpensive and easy to administer, was all he needed to regain his strength, energy, and spirit. A wave of emotion rushed over her, relief, anger at how easily this had been missed, and a fierce protectiveness for the gentle soul sitting before her. She knelt down and cupped Rusty's face in her hands, feeling the warmth of his fur, the slight wag of his tail brushing against her arm. "You're not broken, sweet boy," she whispered. "You just needed someone to look a little closer." Beside him, Daisy gave a soft, almost approving whine, as if sensing the shift in the air. She licked Rusty's cheek and leaned into him, their bond as strong as ever. In that moment, Dr. Ramirez realized something even deeper. Daisy had known all along. Her calm presence, her gentle encouragement. She had been Rusty's silent guardian, his anchor in a world that had misunderstood him. Dr. Ramirez rose quickly, her mind already racing with plans. She would write up Rusty's new diagnosis immediately. With treatment started right away, his energy and spirit would blossom, and with Daisy's steady companionship, his adjustment would be even smoother. But there was more. She knew that separating them would break them both. They needed each other, not just for comfort, but for survival, for healing. They were a bonded pair in every sense of the word. Stepping out into the hallway, Dr. Ramirez waved down Mia, the volunteer who had spent countless afternoons sitting by their kennel. "Put a hold on everything for Daisy and Rusty," Dr. Ramirez said firmly, her voice steady and strong. "They're not going anywhere." Mia's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" Dr. Ramirez smiled, a glimmer of hope breaking through the sorrow that had filled the shelter for days. "I'm very serious. Their story isn't ending today. In fact," she said, glancing back at the clinic room where Daisy and Rusty waited, "I think it's just beginning." It didn't take long for the news to ripple through the shelter like wildfire. First, it was the vet techs whispering excitedly near the supply closet. Then it was the front desk staff who passed the news from one person to another between phone calls and walk-ins. By mid-afternoon, every volunteer, staff member, and even a few visitors knew. Daisy and Rusty had been given a second chance. Mia was the first to act. She rushed back to their kennel with a new sign, bold, bright, and impossible to miss. In large, colorful letters, it read, "Bonded pair, special story. Ask about us." She taped it carefully to the front gate and even tied a cheerful blue ribbon to the latch. Within minutes, curious visitors began to gather. Families, couples, and even a few individuals approached the kennel, drawn in by the buzz. They leaned in, speaking in soft voices, marveling at the sight of Daisy and Rusty curled together. It was impossible not to be moved. Somehow, just by existing, the two dogs told a story that pulled at every heart in the room. A story of loyalty, survival, and hope. It wasn't long before someone snapped a picture of them cuddling, the bright new sign in the background, and posted it to the shelter's social media page with a simple caption. "Two hearts, one story. These best friends need a forever home together. Hashtag adopt on shop, hashtag second chances." The post spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Within an hour, hundreds of people had liked, shared, and commented. Messages flooded the shelter's inbox, people asking about them, people offering donations, people wanting updates. Some even offered to cover their medical costs just to ensure they had the best shot at a new life. Back in their kennel, Daisy and Rusty remained blissfully unaware of the stir they were causing. Daisy lifted her head occasionally when someone approached, her soft brown eyes hopeful but cautious. Rusty, feeling her gentle encouragement, would inch forward too, his tail giving a slow, shy wag. Each visitor who stopped by left a little lighter, touched by something they couldn't quite put into words. Daisy and Rusty weren't just dogs. They were a reminder that even in the darkest moments, love could still be found, clinging tightly, refusing to let go. And as evening began to fall, painting the shelter walls in a golden glow, there was a feeling in the air that hadn't been there in a long time. Hope, thick and warm, settling into every heart. The shelter had braced for a goodbye. Instead, it had found a reason to believe. The next morning, the shelter doors swung open earlier than usual. A cool breeze followed a tall, smiling woman inside, her arms full of paperwork and a tote bag slung over one shoulder. Her name was Olivia, and she wasn't just another visitor. She was a representative from a regional rescue organization known for helping bonded pairs and special needs dogs find forever homes. She had seen the viral post about Daisy and Rusty the night before. The photo of the two dogs cuddled together had tugged at her heart in a way she couldn't ignore. She had barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities, and by sunrise, she was already on the road, eager to meet them. Mia greeted her at the front desk, wide-eyed but hopeful. Word had spread that someone important was coming, but no one had dared to imagine how quickly things could change. "You're here for Daisy and Rusty?" Mia asked, her voice full of quiet excitement. "Yes," Olivia said, smiling warmly. "I'd love to meet them and see how we can help." She was led down the familiar rows of kennels until they reached the one at the end, where Daisy and Rusty lay as always, pressed against each other like two halves of one whole. As Olivia approached, Daisy lifted her head, her soft brown eyes locking onto the visitor with curiosity and a hint of hope. Rusty, sensing Daisy's shift, gave a tentative wag of his tail. Olivia knelt slowly outside the kennel, speaking in a soothing tone. "Hi there, sweethearts," she said. "I've heard so much about you." Without hesitation, Daisy rose to her feet, stretching slightly before moving closer to the gate. Rusty followed, more cautious but trusting. Olivia extended her hand, letting them sniff, giving them space to feel safe. Within minutes, Daisy was leaning into her hand and Rusty was wagging more confidently, the soft thump of his tail against the kennel wall making Olivia smile wider than she had in days. "They're incredible," Olivia said quietly, glancing up at Mia. "They are," Mia agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "They just needed someone to see it." Olivia sat back on her heels, heart already made up. She knew that finding a home for a bonded pair could be a challenge. But Daisy and Rusty weren't ordinary. Their story, their love, had already touched thousands of hearts. With the right help, finding them a family wouldn't be a question of if, only when. Standing up, Olivia brushed off her jeans and turned to Mia with a determined look. "I want to help," she said. "Let's get them ready for a new life." And just like that, a new chapter for Daisy and Rusty began. one filled with promise, with second chances, and with the kind of love that refuses to let go. The days that followed moved quickly, but for Daisy and Rusty, every moment was a step closer to something they had never truly known, a real home. Olivia worked closely with the shelter team to finalize their veterinary care, arrange their paperwork, and prepare them for adoption through her rescue organization's network. The shelter's social media account continued sharing updates, each post gathering more love and support than the last. People from all over the state, and even beyond, followed their journey, rooting for them. Then, one afternoon, the shelter's phone rang. A soft-spoken couple named Jenna and Marcus had seen Daisy and Rusty's story and had fallen in love instantly. They had no other pets, a big fenced yard, and hearts full of room for a pair who needed to stay together. When Jenna and Marcus arrived to meet them, it felt almost like the shelter was holding its breath. Would Daisy and Rusty connect with them? Would they sense that this was the family they had been waiting for? The moment Jenna knelt down and opened her arms, Daisy trotted over without hesitation, tail wagging in wide, sweeping arcs. Rusty hesitated for only a second before following, nudging his head into Jenna's chest with a soft sigh. Marcus chuckled warmly and sat cross-legged on the floor, letting the dogs approach at their own pace. Within minutes, Rusty was curled against him, soaking in gentle scratches behind his ears. Tears welled up in Mia's eyes as she watched from the hallway. After everything, the uncertainty, the fear, the heartbreak, this was the moment they had all prayed for. The adoption process was swift but careful. Olivia and the shelter staff made sure Jenna and Marcus understood Rusty's thyroid condition, his need for daily medication, and most importantly, the importance of keeping the two dogs together. Jenna simply smiled and said, "They're family. That's all that matters." On the day Daisy and Rusty left the shelter, a small crowd gathered to see them off. Staff members hugged each other, wiping away tears of joy. Someone tied a big red bow around Daisy's collar, while Rusty proudly wore a blue one. As they walked out the front doors, Daisy glanced back once, as if to say goodbye, then pressed happily against Rusty's side as they stepped into the sunshine. A new life was waiting, one filled with soft beds, long walks, belly rubs, and most importantly, the unconditional love they had always deserved. In the end, Daisy and Rusty didn't just find a home. They found a future together. And for everyone who had witnessed their journey, it was a reminder that sometimes, just sometimes, love really does save the day.